Hey everybody, it's Roger, creator of the Azure Sandbox, and in today's video, we're going to discuss Azure Update Manager. We're going to test it out against the Azure Sandbox. So let's get started. So Azure Update Manager is the new service, native Azure service for doing basically patch management and update management against your virtual machines in Azure. And it can also be extended to cover patch management for virtual machines on premises through Azure Arc. So this diagram came off the Learn site. It's the best I could find. It's pretty simple. So basically, let's start over here on the right, and let's assume that we're working with an Azure only estate to start with. So when you onboard a virtual machine to Azure Update Manager, a virtual machine extension gets pushed to the VM, whether that's a Windows Server VM or a Linux VM. That extension then reports patch assessment data up to the Azure Resource Graph, which then gets surfaced in the Azure portal, along with all kinds of interesting capabilities for understanding how many machines are up to date from a patching perspective and how many require patches to be applied. So there's no dependency anymore on log analytics. There's no dependency on Azure automation. It's a really simple and clean service that's natively integrated into the Azure platform using Azure Resource Graph. So it's pretty cool. Now, if you want to extend the patch management for Azure Update Manager to on-premise, your on-premises servers, what you would do is onboard those servers using Azure Arc, and then it would simply deploy that same update management virtual machine extension to those machines, and they can be included in your patch assessment and patch deployment. And then it also supports some scheduling capabilities where you can schedule, when patches go out, synchronize it with Patch Tuesday, however your organization wants to do patch management. So finally, we have a native capability to do that in Azure. So first thing I want to do is kind of talk about how I tested it out in the Azure Sandbox. So if we go up to our handy dandy URL for Azure Sandbox, and that'll take us to the Azure Sandbox guide in the Azure Resource Center. And if we look at, the architecture for the Azure Sandbox, you can see we've got several VMs in a full deployment of the Azure Sandbox. We've got a Windows Server VM here running Windows Server Core that functions as a domain controller. We've got a Windows Jumpbox server here. We've got an Ubuntu Linux VM here, which we use as a Linux jump box and as a DevOps agent. And then we also have a Microsoft SQL Server virtual machine running here. So total of 4 VMs in the Azure Sandbox that, if we want to ensure is secure, part of that involves making sure that all the latest security fixes and updates have been applied to those machines and that they're not, drifting out of compliance with your organization's patch management policy. So let's see how we can do that. So in a new build of the Azure Sandbox, what I have done is I have onboarded all of those machines automatically to Azure Update Manager. And one thing I neglected to mention in the overview, Azure Update Manager is free for Azure virtual machines, and it's like $5 a server for on-premises servers through Azure Arc. Um, so if we go look at the code here, I can show you quickly in Terraform how these machines were onboarded to Azure Update Manager. So let's look first in VNet Shared. And let me just bump up the font size here to make things a little bit easier to see. So in VNet Shared, we have the code for our domain controller here. So this is the Terraform code we use to provision it. And you'll notice that I've got two new properties included. The first is patch assessment mode set to automatic by platform. So that allows for platform orchestrated patch assessment through that Azure Update Manager virtual machine extension that we discussed earlier. And I have this provision VM agent equals true. That makes it possible to automatically provision the Azure Update Manager VM agent down to the machine. So this is how we would do it on deployment to onboard a machine when it's initially created. Okay, and so that's the code, the Terraform code that we use to do it for our domain controller. You'll see here the same code is used to onboard the Windows Jumpbox VM here. And finally, the same code is used for, oh, sorry, that's our Linux Jumpbox. And then the same code here is used to onboard our Windows Server Jumpbox. So whether it's Windows Server or Linux, they both, are onboarded to Azure Update Manager using those same two properties. And then the last machine that we onboard is our SQL VM. And, we use those same two properties here, patch assessment mode and provision VM agent, okay? And then there's one additional tweak that we can do on the SQL VM to make sure that we're not just patching the Windows operating system, but we're also patching SQL Server. So the way that you do that is you enable first-party updates in Windows Update. So that can be done interactively. It can be done using a script. I believe it can also be done using like group policy. What I elected to do was do it using a script since I'm already pushing a script out there to do a bunch of, post-deployment configuration of SQL Server. So here is that script, that configure VM MSSQL. And I just added these 4 lines of code to the end. Okay, so basically this enables first-party updates through Windows Update. Okay, and that gets, obviously run on the machine at provision time using that custom script extension that we push out to the SQL Server virtual machine. So that's pretty straightforward from a code perspective. Let's go take a look and see what this looks like in the Azure portal. So if we go up to portal.azure.com, you will see there's the new Azure Update Manager. And if I go into Azure Update Manager, we can see that we've got some interesting status information. So first of all, this talks about the update status of my virtual machines, and I can see that I've got 3 virtual machines here that have pending updates, and one with no pending updates. So I get a high-level overview across my estate of, what's up to date from a patching perspective and what's not. Um, it looks like here I get a overview of patch orchestration, and 75% of them are doing Windows automatic updates, and one of them is doing image default automatic updates, which is probably my Linux machine. So this is basically saying that I'm using Windows Update on all the Windows VMs, and I'm using APT on my Ubuntu VM. I believe that's what it's saying. So this is a nice, summary overview of the current status. Now, if I want to go in and I want to actually patch these machines that are, currently have pending updates, I can just click on this and it'll take me down to this Machines tab here, and this will show me all the different machines that, have pending updates. So I've got 4 pending updates on JumpWin 1, 1 pending update on Jump Linux 1, and 3 pending updates on my domain controller. And it looks like my SQL Server VM is up to date with no pending updates, right? So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to interactively go in and tell Azure Update Manager to go ahead and apply those patches to my VMs. So this is a nice, capability to apply one-time updates. Let's say it's a 0-day type situation. You really want to push these updates or patches, and you don't want to wait for your schedule to kick in, right? So I'll go ahead and select these 3 virtual machines, and I'll choose this one-time update option. And it's basically asking me to confirm, and I'll say, yep, install these updates now. And so it's gone ahead and, going to ask me to confirm that choice. And I'm going to click next. And I can go and interactively select which patches I want to deploy. So I get a list of them here. There's like 5 different patches on the Windows side, and there's 1 patch here on the Linux side that can go out from. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and take the defaults, and I can tell it to go ahead and reboot if required, to never reboot, or to always reboot. I'm just going to leave it to the default here, reboot for required, and it's going to give me a maintenance window of 235 minutes by default. So that's the window that Azure is going to use to, measure whether the updates have been successfully deployed. So I'll go ahead with that default. It's like almost 4 hours, I think. So I'll go ahead and click next, and we'll go ahead and install these updates. And we'll come back and finish the video in 4 hours or so and see how successful we were in applying those updates. See you in a little bit. Okay, everybody, I'm back. It's been several hours since we kicked off that one-time update operation. So let's see how Azure Update Manager fared. So again, we have 4 VMs, and it's basically saying I've got a couple of pending updates here still to go on I've got 2 machines that have pending updates, and I have 2 machines that have no pending updates. Okay, so if we go in and we look at the machines themselves, I could see Jump Linux 1 is all patched up, ready to go. So all the patches that needed to go on there got applied, which is awesome. SQL didn't require any patches, so we were in good shape with that one from the get-go. But it's still saying that I've got one pending update for my domain controller and for my Windows jump box. So if I go into that pending update, we see it's this particular KB article associated with this security update. And in looking at the history um, of this particular update, like if we go down here, you can see a little bit more information. You get a KB version, you got the various machines where it's supposed to be applied. I went and I pulled up that KB article, and what it's basically telling me here is that this patch will only work if you have a Windows recovery environment partition on your machine. And neither of those machines have a Windows recovery environment partition. So this patch is not installing on those systems. So Azure Update Manager, is reporting correctly the state. It's reporting correctly that patch couldn't be applied. I'm not too sure if I have the ability here to, kind of like silence this particular patch, since I know it's not, applicable for the machines. But that's something that, we can research later. So, the other thing that I wanted to show you was, in the process of debugging that, I was able to go into the history here, and you can see in the history, I'm going to just limit this down to the last 24 hours, which is, everything that's happened since we initially enabled Azure Update Manager. And you can see all the different operations that have occurred, all the different, patches that got applied, all the different failures that occurred. And, eventually, we wound up in the state that we're in. In kind of diagnosing that particular patching issue that I had with those two machines, I did try to reboot the machines a couple times and tried some other manual update operations. They kept failing, which led me to, do this investigation on this KB article. And, from that point forward, I was able to realize that patch is never going to install on those two machines. So I feel like Azure Update Manager did a really good job of, getting these machines patched up to the highest level. It's given me good visibility into, the security posture in my estate from an updates perspective. And it was really a good first experience. So hopefully you all will have an opportunity to roll out Azure Update Manager in your enterprise, and you can always deploy the Azure Sandbox and test it on the Azure Sandbox yourself to get a feel for how it works. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you on the next video.